Welcome, everyone, to this week's Really Big Fan podcast. We were having very important conversations before the music hit, and we had to stop them for you, so I hope you appreciate it. I'm your host, ChZuck. I am joined, as always, by my wife and co-host, Acronym.
Sup?
Whew, what a week we've had.
We've done multiple things.
So many things.
And that's abnormal for us.
Very much so. I'm very tired.
You're an indoor cat.
I am. Absolutely. I like playing my video games. I like watching movies on my couch. And I like sleep.
And there were things I really wanted to do this week, so we went to Space Dive.
We did. It was a blast.
We were there when it didn't get raided by the fire department.
It's true. It's absolutely true. We went on the first night, and they hit them on the second night?
Yep. There was flame performers, and everybody was wearing flammable clothing.
It's always those people throwing fire around that gets the party shut down.
Yep,
man.
and there were about 500 people in there.
Yeah.
And the max I've ever gotten in there is 3. So
when we went on Thursday, there was a lot of people.
There was a lot of people.
A lot of people.
It was very body to body, but it was totally worth it. If you've never been to Space Dive at the Tangent, as long as they don't cancel it for the rest of our lives after that,
right,
you should go next year. It's
yeah,
usually around May 4th.
You're essentially walking into the cantina from Star Wars.
Yep.
There's a bunch of aliens and people dressed as Star Wars people, and I wasn't aware of how much of a LARP it was going to be. Mm-hmm. So I wore my mask for the first 10 minutes, and it got all fogged up, and then I was like, I'm going to take my mask off so I can actually see what this looks like, and it looked great.
I broke alcohol edge because I don't know if anybody knows that I'm sober here, but I broke alcohol edge just to try blue milk because I really needed to know what that tasted like.
It was strong.
Yeah, whoever the bartender was, you got your money's worth because I could not finish the drink.
So much alcohol in that
so
drink.
strong. I was like, I will not be able to drive if I drink this.
Yeah. But May is a full month.
Yes.
We had Space Dive. Free Comic Book Day was last Saturday for me. We got Motor City Comic Con coming up in a few weeks.
We went to Blink last night.
We did, and we saw Guardians, and that was a fun time too. I'm sure we won't spoil anything.
Yes.
But
this is going to be spoiler free today. We made sure before we got on here.
think it's probably my top 5, if not my top 3.
Yep. Same.
As far as Marvel movies. Very, very good time. But we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking to longtime friend and fellow podcaster Nate Bender about his love of punk music and vinyl records and stuff like that. Before we do it, though, it's time for the headlines. That's not what the headlines music sounds like.
No, that's definitely sounds like Blue's Clues, though, and that was the first thing that came to mind. Well, it's not like I can say, hi, I'm MTV News with Kurt Loder, because as I'll kick off the headlines here and interject, MTV News is no longer.
Yeah.
And there were some iconic news broadcasts within our lifetimes. I know for
it's a cultural touchstone.
Yeah. For me, I watched MTV News, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, it actually wasn't Kurt Loder. It was Gideon Yago that was live during the 9/11 broadcast.
Okay.
And that was where I got my news. So we got home early, got picked up, and me and my best friend, which they let my mom pick up my best friend, which is abnormal as hell.
It wouldn't happen
today. But we were sitting in my bedroom with the little box TV watching MTV News about the Twin Towers. And you had Kurt Cobain, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Amongst many other news stories. It's funny because each generation like Kurt Loder was the cornerstone of MTV News, but who did you just mention?
I had Gideon Yago and
he was
Sway.
He was after my time. But like Tabitha Soren is like...
That's the 90s, yep.
Yep, totally. It was always Kurt Loder and Tabitha Soren. And then I know there was a couple other MTV people that transitioned from VJs to MTV News, and I don't remember any of your names, and I'm very sorry. But yeah, it's just another indication that, the world keeps spinning. No more MTV News.
Yeah, a lot of people were saying, hey, maybe if we still had music on MTV News would matter. But it's one of those things where, they changed the programming. And honestly, I would have just gotten rid of a couple hours worth of Rob Dyrdek's Fantasy Factory in order to keep it going.
For some more MTV News. Mm-hmm. Well, that was something I was reading an article about it on AV Club, and they talked about the fact that as MTV News became less and less relevant. Part of it was the rise of the internet, and the what would have been MTV News turned into stuff like Vice and BuzzFeed.
Yep.
And eventually MTV was just like, well, it's too much money to do that.
Somebody tweeted, and I couldn't help but laugh, but I also was like, oh man, it was like, what did you do? Now Kurt Loder doesn't have a home. And I was like, oh, and then I actually saw him tweet and retweeted it earlier today. It was like, hey guys,
I saw him say something about being very honored for everybody
that was thinking of him at this time.
So, the Walter Cronkite of our generation.
Straight up. It's crazy.
Another big bit of real world news is the writer's strike entering its second week, as they're just trying to get some livable wages out of the studios, and the studios not budging because the studio heads want to keep all the money.
Yep.
That they're already getting. But the writer's strike, we've got the Blade reboot and the 5th season of Stranger Things have halted production while the writer's strike is going on. And it's really funny. I saw over the weekend, too, like the Hollywood Reporter had some article of like, here's the shows and movies that the writer's strike is depriving you of. And it's like, no, here's the shows and movies that the studios are depriving us of because they won't pay the writers what they're owed.
Of course, but if they say that, they're going to ruin their relationship. This is the reason why I'm not in corporate journalism anymore.
Sure.
They tell you what you're allowed to say, and I'm not a fan of it. So
Right.
That's why we're streaming on Twitch.
And really, somebody that I listen to very frequently, podcast-wise, was talking about the fact that like part of the writer's strike is the fact that they don't get shit for streaming.
No, they don't.
They don't get anything. And they're like, can we get 2%?
So actually, Snoop Dogg went on record on that.
Yeah.
He was talking about how it's very akin to the streaming service problem that we have with music.
Yeah.
And how, like, music doesn't get paid as well. I talked to other artists. They can barely pay a phone bill with the wages that they get from their band stuff.
Our buddies in Bathroom in the Future use their streaming every Christmas to buy Little Caesars $5 pizzas.
Yep.
And this year, I think, was the best year ever. They got to get 3 of them.
Yeah. And that's insane. Like, it's depressing. And you have that happening, and then you've got some celebrity support happening. I know Pete Davidson went and got a bunch of pizzas.
Good.
And went out there. There was a lot of the people from Abbott Elementary, the actors, were out on their feet doing the thing with everybody else.
I saw a picture with Mark Hamill. I
Yep.
think he was out there with them.
I think he went out there as well. And then Imagine Dragons. They decided they would perform for free. You should have just bought a pizza, my guys.
I don't know. I'm sure somebody was happy to see Imagine Dragons.
Well, here's the thing. Imagine Dragons, with the exception of, what is it? Does Justin like Imagine Dragons? Justin,
No,
he likes 21 Pilots.
21 Pilots, right.
Okay, I was going to make a dig at Justin if I could, but I can't. Love you, Justin. But Imagine Dragons is now the new Nickelback. So.
It's true. Yeah, now that Nickelback is in their redemption arc, Imagine Dragons is taking all the heat.
Yep.
Which is ridiculous. So yeah, it's one of those things to keep in mind that, when you're like, oh, my new TV show's been delayed, or oh, my movie's been delayed. Well, I mean, people just trying to make a living, yo.
Yeah, and if you love us, love the other writers and, show creators and stuff like that, because we just do this from the seat of our pants a lot of the time. There's a little bit of research that goes into it.
Not only are we not part of the writers union, but our show is completely off the cuff.
Exactly.
So there's no writing involved.
But if you love us, take care of those other people. Support them. Signal boost their tweets. It's really important.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Something that's a little bit less important is that the Enter the Spider-Verse movie that comes out in June will have its own Burger King burger. It's you can get a Whopper with a red bun with black sesame seeds, just like Miles's costume.
Okay, A, we're going to do that, but B, I need to see the Spot try to eat one of those.
Yeah, it goes in one hole and comes out the other kind of thing. That's if they were smart, they'd have animated like a 30-second or 15-second ad of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just of him putting the burger in different holes and it coming back out.
Question about that, too. Have you seen the animation panel that has been going around for that movie?
No, I don't think so.
So it shows the Spot, and it's a really cool animation style or whatever. He's positioned in the same way as Miles' spray paint drawing.
That's fascinating. There's so much Easter egg. Even that first movie.
It's so weird.
There's so much. If I've never I cannot remember the last time a movie had so much stuff that watching the extra features and having the people who made it like show you like the fact that they were animated at different frames per second
That's
depending
so
on
cool to
what
me.
universe they came out of.
Yeah.
It was just amazing stuff.
Well, and we know I'm obsessed with his mom in the trailer for the second one snapping, and you see the Puerto Rican flag pop up because he's getting a B in Spanish. And she's like, hey! Like, it's real quick, but the attention to detail is just immaculate.
Yeah, I can't. Looking forward to it. Absolutely looking forward to it. And speaking of Puerto Rico, WWE is in Puerto Rico this weekend.
I was crying the entire time that Zelina Vega was getting her moment.
Yeah.
I know that she's like an acquired taste and whatever, but I'm very happy for her. And she got to honor Ray, she got to honor Eddie, and she got to honor her husband by doing one of his moves. So that was pretty awesome. And now Damian Priest is being hailed as, the next big thing. Yeah, now that he got to shine on his own and do this, even though obviously Bad Bunny got the win, he's now being looked at as like one of the future people of the company, which is awesome.
Right, well, it's one of those things where almost like when Sami Zayn fought the guy from Jackass at WrestleMania, it was like you got out there with a celebrity, they did not get hurt, and you put on a banger of a match with a person that, doesn't do this every day kind of thing. So obviously you're very good at what you do kind of thing. I honestly, as much as we don't like Austin Theory, I think him getting to interact with like Steve Austin had a little bit of that vibe too.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, okay, we can trust you.
Yes.
To do that stuff. But it's got to be really cool too for Finn Balor to like see the younger generation of NXT guys that he's kind of overseeing now in Judgment Day, all getting their, like, Rhea Ripley's getting her moment. Now Damian Priest is getting her moment. Dominic is booed out of every building. He's got nuclear heat, which is a phrase you'll hear later in this show.
Isn't Finn now also in the running for that new title?
They had, so Monday they started a tournament for the new title, and he lost his match.
Oh, that sucks.
Already, so that's
being
unfortunate.
That he was the first, Universal champion or something?
And he had to give it up because he popped his shoulder.
Yeah, like I kind of wish they would have given him another opportunity to get that, but... at the same time, he made Savio Vega look like $1 million.
He certainly did.
Did you see the clip from the opposite
certainly
angle?
Did.
Like it's obviously very pulled punches and stuff like that. But when they showed it on TV, he looked like $1 million. Yeah, so,
and it was honestly, I want to say, kind of start to finish, it was a really good show.
It really was.
Like they started with Io Sky and Bianca, and they brought the house down, and then I think if there were 7 matches, at least 5 to 6 of them were really good.
I remember distinctly zoning out during the Seth Rollins match.
Yeah.
Like, the only part I really caught was him doing the 3 curb stomps.
Right.
But other than that, and everybody that watched that match, was very focused on it, said he did everything he could with almost. Exactly. So, what you can't really ask for more, but, I've recently started to tune out Seth Rollins. I don't know what that's about.
Because of the singing.
Yeah, probably.
You hear the singing, you're like, oh, Seth Rollins is on the screen.
Yes, exactly. And the Bobby Lashley
and
match.
It's hard to pay
anything Bobby Lashley, I just not there.
Yeah. I don't want to say WWE is back, but they're doing some pretty good stuff, I gotta say. And AEW is in town tonight. We were just at the LCA 24 hours ago, and now there's going to be a wrestling event.
Yes, and for once we are not going to that.
True. It's very true. I'll be watching it on TV at home. The last thing I wanted to bring up as far as the news is a little bit of the world. It's kind of a good news, bad news situation, but it's exemplary of we're living in the end times of the world. So I told you guys a couple of weeks ago how over in Japan, they are absolutely out of Pokemon cards. They're having to go back to printing to get Pokemon cards into the stores so that people can buy Pokemon cards. Well, the bad news is that a 31-year-old British man has been sentenced to life in prison after beating his 50-year-old neighbor with a bag filled with Pokemon tins because his neighbor called him a pedophile. The 31-year-old man does have some learning disabilities.
Yikes.
But still, he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison because he beat a guy to death with Pokemon tins.
That is not the reason I'd want to be in prison. I'm going to try to go out on a higher note there.
Right. But the good news is in Akihabara over in Japan, a store has made a display specifically that they stock with Pokemon cards every day, and only middle schoolers and younger are allowed to buy out of that display to make sure that the kids, who these things are actually for, can get their hands on them, so that us adults who are just snapping them all up and trying to resell them can't. I don't know how I'd feel if we went to Target and they were like, yeah, if you're not a middle schooler, you can't buy these Transformers.
I mean, that'd probably suck, but like, you know that the reason that they sell the Transformers at this point is for you guys.
Oh, 100%.
So like, that's why.
Yeah.
But they still put it in the toy section to make you guys feel like you're young again.
Yeah, for sure.
But when it comes down to like, you know,
they even moved all the stuff that was in the media section, like the Ninja Turtles action, the like $30 Ninja Turtles action figures and the Stranger Things. They moved that all into the toy section at Target.
Yeah.
Instead of having it in a separate section.
Well, sometimes they need to do that, because that was even something that I told you when we were walking into LCA last night, is that there was supposed to be a limit on the posters.
Yeah.
There were specific posters for every Blink-182 tour stop, and the person that was running the merch booth outside sold them all to the first person.
Ooh.
Because they didn't know they were supposed to give the limit.
Yeah.
And they were already online. It was popping up in the Blink Discord. So
I would like to believe that even if it was a figure that I really, really wanted, if I went to Target and they said only middle schoolers are allowed to buy this figure, I'd be like, that's okay.
Yeah, I feel like you wouldn't have, like, you're not a person that's going to have a tantrum because you want it. At that point, you'd just be like, okay, well, I'll just buy it online, whatever. Like, it wouldn't be that big of a deal.
No, I mean, we've got a high school down the street and then a middle school around the corner. I'd just be like, hey, kid, you want to go to Target?
I'm pretty sure that would be one of those Chang abducts Shirley's kids a la Community.
More than likely.
Yeah.
And no matter how much I told me and the kid told the cops that there was no sex involved, I would still be going to jail. Still, absolutely.
The last thing I wanted to point out, because we said we were going to talk about Guardians and then we didn't really fit it in other than to brief overview. I am not going to tell you anything, so there's not going to be any spoilers. All I want to say is that if you are concerned about the visuals of animals with animatronic parts attached to them,
with like prosthetics,
or hints to animal abuse, keep in mind that that's going to happen. There's not like a intro trigger warning on the movie, and some people on Twitter were upset about that.
Sure.
There is also an F-bomb in the movie.
Yep.
So if you think that your kid can't handle that, then this is not the
language
movie
is
for
pretty
them.
salty.
Yeah, it is. It's listed as PG-13, but it could have probably been an R. I'm sure Marvel tried to get it down as close to PG-13 as they could to make it accessible.
It's not quite a Deadpool movie, but it is probably the saltiest language of any Marvel Cinematic movie.
Yeah, and you made a good comment. It was like, if this didn't have so much comedy in it, it would be a horror.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, all the stuff that you get of like Rocket's backstory is very horror movie-esque, but because it's Guardians, they find a way to like spin it and lighten the mood so that you're not just horrified by his origins and what he went through.
So if you have children, keep that in mind and don't be a Karen and freak out online instead when you see it.
And there's a few things for sure that I'm very glad that I didn't have spoiled for me, and that's why we won't spoil them for you. Things that like I'm glad I didn't know were coming, and then when they happened, I was like, oh, that's awesome. I didn't know I was going to see that. That's cool. So there you go. We're going to take a short break here. We're going to come back with our interview segment. It's going to be another little bit of a long one, but I think it's a real good one. We're talking to Nate Bender about his introduction to punk rock music next with the Really Big Fan podcast. Let me hit a commercial. Blammo. All Gaming says he's going to AEW tonight. Good for you, brother.
Whoop, whoop.
You're going to have a great time, I'm sure. I saw on the screens when we were at LCA last night, the main event is Moxley and Kenny Omega in a steel cage.
Did you see... I turned my thing. Did you see what Renee posted within the last 24 hours?
No.
She apparently went to go get their cat neutered thinking it was a boy and it was a girl.
Ha!
And I was like, we've been there before.
Yeah.
We've questioned it.
It's true. Absolutely.
We did not know if Kylo was a boy or a girl until he grew balls. Pretty much.
Yeah, it was in question for a little bit.
Yeah.
Until we could find that little sack.
That's why I picked a neutral name for him. Because I figured Kylo could be gender neutral.
Gender neutral Kylo Ren.
Yes.
All right, says we got about 5 seconds, so we're going to shut up. You guys enjoy the interview segment. We'll be back with our serotonin boost right after this. It's the Really Big Fan Podcast, Acronym, and ChZuck's hanging out here, and with another familiar voice. If you've been following me from show to show for a while, he is the voice of Limit Break Radio, as well as Let's Play Daily Gaming News, which you can listen to every single weekday on wherever you're getting your podcast. It's Mr. Nathan Bender.
Hi, guys.
Great to see you, Nate. How you been?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so one of the things when we started the Really Big Fan Podcast that we thought would be cool that we could branch out from the last show I was doing was we didn't just have to talk about nerd stuff. We could talk about music. We could talk about bands and stuff like that. And I know that in hanging out with you over the last couple of years as friends, you have a great love for punk rock music, and I really wanted to dig into that and find out, like, where did that start for you?
I do. It's like, God, where is my history with punk start? So it probably starts with my dad and stealing his records at some point.
Okay.
He didn't have too many punk records, but The Clash was in there, the Talking Heads, that kind of stuff. And, you know, like I guess one of the first bands that I showed a interest in outside of like, oh, it's my parents' music or it's just something that I heard on the radio was Green Day. And that was like Dookie. I had CDs before I had Dookie, but Dookie was the first one that I went out and bought with my own money.
Nice.
So, you know, at some point my music collection was Green Day and Soundgarden and Candlebox. But the Green Day was all me. And it was, you know, like it was something that it's not like my parents disapproved of it, but they didn't totally get it at the same time. Okay. You know, I know that both of you have some context for my parents, but both of my parents worked in radio in the 70s and 80s. And what I find so interesting is that they actually worked in New York radio right in the midst of like when punk was becoming just a fucking massive thing.
Nice. Okay.
And it played no role in their lives. Like they literally lived on Roosevelt Island, like, you know, worked on Manhattan, and yet CBGB's never played a part in, you know, even in their professional lives. They were working a fucking rock and roll radio station, right? Like, it just, to me, that was always really profoundly weird, and I still struggle with that. But anyway, so I started listening to Green Day, and, you know, my dad, as he's, working and noting my interest, gets me an opportunity to see Green Day. This was a show that was being put on through 105.1 The Edge, and it was Green Day at the Second House in Pontiac. And I'm not sure if anyone remembers the Second House, but it was a really not very big club. It was small. I mean, it wasn't tiny, but I would say like Clutch Cargo's was bigger, okay, right? Like it was small. And so, like, that was the gimmick. Book the biggest band at the time that we can get at the smallest club, and then give away tickets on the air. It was this huge thing, and it was awesome. So that was like my first punk show that I ever went to, and I think it was the Queers that ended up opening for them.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just like, this is the best thing that I've ever been to. Like, this is the coolest shit. And I got to meet them, and they were totally cool and super nice people. But like, it was like, oh, this is awesome. So I was like in middle school at that point, and then I think my taste in music kind of deviated based on some of my friendships. Like when I was a freshman in high school, I got really into like being a dance DJ because my buddy Andrew was super into it. So like I put it aside, but I came back to it probably, a couple of years into high school, and that's when the obsession really took off, because I found a record store called Flipside Records. At the time, it was in Clawson, Michigan. Now it's in Berkeley. It's still around. Yeah. But at the time it was in Clawson, and I was working summers at a place, this Bloomfield Hills Country Club. I was a caddy. And when you're a caddy, you meet all types of really, really, really sketchy dudes that just work. That's what they do. They work there. Some of them are 40 years old, and they're sketchy because they're still a caddy at 40. Some of them are sketchy because they're like, 23-year-old burnouts. And that was the dude that I was hanging out with. And on our lunch break, he took us from Bloomfield to Clawson to go to this record store, Flipside.
Nice.
And that's where I discovered bootlegs and like singles and songs that by Green Day I had never heard before.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I got my own car, like that was one of the places that I was going at every opportunity that I could. So my natural interest in Green Day led me to kind of talking to people there and taking recommendations from the folks who work there. And so, yeah, it opened me up into a much wider world of punk rock, but that's sort of like the origin there.
Now, during that time frame, did you ever fall into that loop of where they were talking about how once Green Day got like fully signed and everything, there was like a disconnect with a lot of people where they were like, well, they're not real punk anymore because now they're signed and everything. Did you run into people like that ever had like an issue with it, or were you one of those people that?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I totally ended up becoming one of those people at some point.
I feel like Nate might have been one of these people, yeah. So I have to ask
100%.
It was like his dirty little secret that he started it with Dookie.
Yeah.
But everybody I mean, Plunk is the album.
I mean that's the thing though, is that like I was always really honest about the way that I got into it. Is eventually I ended up working at Flipside, right? So
awesome.
I ended up being the dude behind the counter and was aware that there were these younger kids that were coming in and taking recommendations from me. And so I was always really, I always really laughed at those guys who were like, yeah, man, I came out of the womb listening to Amoebics. I don't know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what rancid even is, man. Like, those guys cracked me the fuck up because it's like, get the fuck out of here. You're like, that's bullshit.
It's this weird one-upping contest where like I have to say the most insane thing to outdo what you just said.
Exactly.
I was there first.
Yeah, there's so many people that when they get into music in any type, it's like they have to go for like, well, what's the hardest thing that I can say that makes me sound super badass? Right. And then they're secretly listening to like, I don't know.
Yeah, like they're really into Blink 182, but they don't want to let anyone know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So like, I mean, like, I definitely grew away from like the pop punk, but I was still listening to, like, dude, I went to fucking, what's the big festival in Chicago?
Lollapalooza.
I went to Lollapalooza in 2005 and was there in, my fucking punk rock gear, rocking out to, oh God.
Now he's got to remember.
Polyphonic Spree, and like,
there you go.
I'm having to reach so far back.
Right. It is funny to hear your record store story because that absolutely gives me the nostalgia for when I was just graduating high school and like every week you got paid for McDonald's and you went to the record store and blew most of it on CDs that you were going to listen to for the next 7 days until you got your next hit of money. so you can go to the record store and buy more CDs.
Yeah, for a while, like I was like everyone else, where I was going to the mall and FYE, and I was getting Punk-O-Rama CDs, and that was how, you know, like I think that's a very like really, really common thing, and even with having some folks kind of point me in directions, you know, through a record store that I liked and ended up being, you know, really solid and reliable. Everyone starts by, you know, listeing to, you know, Fat Records comps and, you know, Epitaph Records stuff. It's, you know, like to kind of claim otherwise is really kind of silly and goofy. But yeah, you know, for a while I was that you know, kid at the mall with you know, with weird colored hair and fucking plaid pants or cutoff shorts, or you know, I had a skateboard for a while, and you know, it kind of came along with the territory of being alive in the year 1999. Like everyone had one of those things at least.
I still dress like that.
It's true. I'm staring at a checkerboard bag right off camera here.
I mean, it's fun.
Checkerboard
you know,
print is all. It's everything to me.
I mean, it's funny how much of the punk rock aesthetic kind of sticks around. Like, I definitely, you know, like there were a couple of shirt vendors that I found where I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. Like one is like video game and nerd stuff done up like metal album covers.
Yeah.
And the other one is just like really simple black shirt, white ink, but it's like all kinds, it's like anime and video games and movies and TV and all kinds of shit. So like it's all kind of the stuff that I love, but in a way where I'm like, oh, I feel really comfortable wearing that.
Definitely. There's even like, I know that there's a place in Grand Rapids. I forget what this place is called, but it's just it's a cave of wonders and weirdness, like so many things that exist within the store. And when I went and toured the back of it, the dude had a wall of patches. And it was like some that were screen printed, but then some of them that were like legit patches. And he had everything. Like I was standing there going, do not use your credit card to buy 20 patches. Do not do it.
I'm so glad you mentioned patches, because like I even busted out the old punk rock vest here. I mean, like this was the degree. Like I was wearing this every day. Like this was the degree of into this shit I was. Like, so you know, like this I don't think works as like everyday wardrobe anymore. But you know, can't bear to part with it.
It was funny because in high school we had a guy that had the Green Day logo from Kerplunk, and he took colored markers and put it on the back of his jacket as like before Dookie came out. Like he saw them before Dookie, and then Dookie hit, and that year he wanted to let everybody know that he was on board before we were.
God.
Yeah, kind of a common rephrase, man. I was into them before they were cool.
Right, exactly. I want to go back to something you said earlier when you were talking about your origin story. So your parents were working in New York while punk was happening. They had no, like, you didn't find anything in your dad's collection to be like, oh, Dad, what's this? Kind of thing. And it'd be a punk record.
No.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and it's a little heartbreaking too, because it's like my dad has a pretty curated vinyl section, a selection at this point, and you know, out of there, like I said, I was able to find an original pressing of the Clash's "London Calling," and you know, a bunch of Talking Heads. Mm-hmm. But like that's about as far as it went. Like it you know, maybe there might be a television record in there. You know, Blondie probably.
Right.
But yeah, like the Ramones or the Sex Pistols, just you know, like that kind of stuff. I think, you know, just played absolutely no role in what they did in any capacity professionally. It wasn't what they were interested in personally. They were much more the Simon and Garfunkel crowd at that point.
Right.
Like I was born in '84, so this was like just before they had me. This would have been like '79 through like '82 in there. But it was like, that was like the punk rock renaissance. That's when all of the shit was like jumping off, especially in New York. And yet it's wild to me that someone who worked in radio at that point wasn't more, and like punk rock wasn't a mainstream thing, nor did it try to be. And that may be a big part of it, is that like, there was actually a big commercial push for punk in like 77 when you had, the sort of first generation of the Sex Pistols and the Ramones before that whole like, being on a big label is like so not punk rock, man, sort of mentality hit. But like, Sham 69 was on EMI, you know what I mean? But like, eventually it's funny because there a couple of things were like turned the tide against big record labels, and it was mostly punk bands cutting songs about how much EMI sucks, you know what I mean? So like a lot of that came out of the British punk rock scene and just sort of mutated into like all major labels are bad or whatever. And so, I guess by the time they were working in New York in the early 80s, that like a lot of these bands that would have been notable from the time, like the DC hardcore bands like Minor Threat, those dudes were not sending 7 inches to radio stations. You know what I mean?
Not at all.
So that, that kind of stuff, it's not that surprising. But I do remember growing up surprised, like, after I had kind of learned about punk as a genre, that, they didn't have any Sex Pistols or they didn't have any Ramones. Like, that was always kind of surprising. Although, when I first got into Green Day, I do remember my dad recommending the Clash and the Sex Pistols, and I think he even thought he had a Sex Pistols record. But in any case, yeah, it definitely is really strange that it was never played even a casual role in any of their lives.
It's wild to me because like but obviously we know I worked with your dad before. So like I have my own like image of your dad in my brain as like what I know he knows. And I wouldn't have even thought he would have known stuff like that either, because it seemed like it was so focused on like classic rock, everything that was, basically morphed into that genre as a whole. Because even when he would talk about like vinyls that he had and stuff like that, it was always the stuff that like you now hear on either like a CSX or you go on to a streaming service and find that playlist that's like, classic 80s, like certain bands like that, like the AC/DCs and things of the world. And so for me, like I've listened to tons of podcasts and things about different music, and one of the ones we were listening to was an episode on Green Day. Yeah. And I think that they even touched base on the fact that like at some point Bad Religion was one of the bands that like maybe broke into recording for a bigger label after a while. I think it might have been Epitaph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the guy from Bad Religion owns the Epitaph label.
Yeah.
Brian.
At some point in the 90s, Bad Religion signed with a major label.
Yes, that's what it was.
To do some stuff for a couple
I think
of years.
It was their second album. And let me tell you, absolutely everyone should go listen to Into the Unknown from 1983. Because it is a prog rock record.
Yeah.
Fucking keyboards and it does not sound like Bad Religion. It's fucking insane. But yeah, like that was one of those things where like, like that definitely, helped set the mold moving forward from like 1984 and forward, right? Where it was like major labels suck and they turn our favorite artists into garbage. Right. That was sort of and like, things like the Suicide Machine's like third record. That doesn't help. You know what I mean? That doesn't help at all. They were on Hollywood Records, and like the cover was like them in suits. Like it was just, you know what I mean? Like it's just like, what the fuck are you doing? This isn't punk. This isn't like what I'm interested in. Like I think their second record was called Battle Hymns, and it was like awesome. It was great, like sort of like propaganda era artwork. It was really fucking cool. And then they came out with this. And like one of the songs on it was "I'm Gonna Buy You a Rose Garden," and it was just like, what are we doing? Why are we making the Suicide Machines do this? It's terrible.
Was there a moment for you that, like, if I track to even like the Green Day side of things, was there a moment where you stopped listening to Green Day because they sort of became that band at some point?
Yeah, they did have a dip, and then like American Idiot was like the Renaissance.
Was sort of well, actually, to be honest, I really liked Nimrod, and I really liked Warning. I thought Warning was a really, really good record. Nobody else agreed with me, but there are still some songs on there that I think are really good, especially when you compare it to that album that they put out in like 2020.
Sure,
whatever that was. That was just
the 20th Century Breakdown one, or
I think that's that after
album.
that album.
I know they did that 3 album where it was like Uno Dos Tres. I'm gonna pull it up, but
it's funny too because I remember when Nimrod came out, there were a few songs on there that was like. At that point, I'm in my mid-20s, and he stops singing about being a teenager and starts singing about being like, I think one of the songs starts with, I was a young boy that had big plans, now I'm just another shitty old man. And we were all like, yes, that's me! They're singing to me! Yeah.
That's a great song, too. And I mean, like, even the really commercial stuff, like Time of Your Life and... that was a great record. I will defend that record, and I'll even defend Warning. I thought Warning was really, really good. And then, like, I'll be honest, I thought American Idiot was really good, even though at that point it was not my taste in punk, and I could recognize that, right? Like, I could at the same time go, this is not my thing, but it's really fucking good. And I'm really glad that this is around and on the radio in the time frame that it was, like 2004 or 5 or whenever. Really cool. A little less eyeliner, Billy Joe, but like really fucking cool. Okay,
I think that's part of like getting older and more mature is being able to identify when a band is going in a direction you don't like, but then also not being a shithead about it and just being like, good for them, they're doing what they want to do.
And I don't think they were even like necessarily going in a like that was still a very Green Day album. Like, it sounded like Green Day, and they were saying exactly what they wanted to say. Just fucking, like, that whole record is really good. When they lost me is when American Idiot went to fucking Broadway. And I went, no. I don't care if this is even rock and roll. This sucks. This just fucking stinks. Like, fine, make your money off of it, but, like, God, just, like, I can't even imagine... I mean, yes, I can. The sweater-wearing white liberal fucking suburbanite that wants to go to the American Idiot Broadway show. Like, come on.
Oh, and believe me, I looked to see what the cost was because it was one of those things where, like, at the time, I was trying to find a middle ground with my mom on things to do. And I was like, you want to go see a Broadway play? I want to know what this Green Day thing's about. Let's look into it. And I think tickets were like over $100 a piece. Ooh. And I was like,
oh my God.
Did not have good money at that time at all. And was like, okay, that's not happening. And I missed the chance. But I had this inherent need to know what that looked like.
Right.
I needed to know.
It felt like, like, American Idiot was like for, somebody who thought Hamilton was too urban for them. You know what I mean? Like, I was just like, this sucks. I wasn't even remotely curious about it. So, like that's where I think Green Day actually lost me. But, it's not like I was going to put their patch on my vest or anything. But yeah, like they were definitely the band that got me into it. And then, as I'm patronizing Flipside and going and, buying bootlegs and Punkorama CDs, a guy by the name of Jeff, who was in a local, oh God, how do I describe them? They were they were like a Japanese D-beat worship band called Feast or Famine. And he slowly started introducing me to like crust punk and really hardcore punk, and like I had started to find stuff like like Gorilla Biscuits and Minor Threat on my own, and then he just like sort of mainlined me right into East Coast like street punk, Mankind and The Pissed and Brutally Familiar and Quincy Punks and Vomit Punks and like all of these kind of now like semi-obscure bands from like the Massachusetts area, that I was just like, this is the shit, this is great. And at that point there was like no going back. It was sort of, as soon as I found the punk that was like never made for commercial consumption, it was like, oh, this is it. This is the real shit. This is the actual shit. And so much of that existed on vinyl. So I actually, when I was much younger, like 16, 15, 16, 17, I had a dance vinyl, because I was trying to be a DJ for some fucking reason. So I had a small vinyl collection from doing that I actually sold off, and I really regret selling that. But that would have been the very beginnings of my vinyl collection. But restarting it with punk rock music and the Mankind 7-inch that I bought, like it was all over from there. Like that was like, this is the kind of punk that I like. This is the aesthetic that I like. Like the whole, looks like it was done on a Xerox copy or like heavy black and white, heavy high contrast, all of that. So that was just like, this is great. And so that was my shit.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Is this the part where you were led into making your own music?
No, I actually, so the first band that I started was called AWOL. And I think that was before I could drive. Like I was 15.
Wow.
And started with like one of my best friends, Kevin, Isaac, and one of Kevin's really close friends, Tommy. And that was like a street punk, like oi sort of inspired punk band. So, but like like they were just really nice to like let me be a part of it, right? Like I played bass, but like I didn't really know what the fuck I was doing. But
the bass is a good place to start if you don't know what you're doing.
It is, and to be fair, it's punk rock, so like our thing was like, we would have like the boombox, right? And we would put a tape in it and record just on the boombox, and we would listen back to it, and we would look at each other and be like, well, it's better than the Casualties, and then we would move on to the next song,
right? And
that was it. As long as it kind of met that bar, is it better than the Casualties? Yeah, I am punk for life. Okay, yeah, it's better. It's better. So, like, yeah, that was kind of our bar, and so it wasn't a very serious band. We had a couple of those boombox recordings, and I think we played a couple of shows. But, and I didn't find this out until recently, we had played a show kind of like down the street from Flipside. It was like I think it was our second show, but it was like the first like real show that we had ever played, and it was in a skating rink that Tom's parents owned. So like we got like an entire night, and so we made flyers called Punk's Night Out.
Night.
And we had like 40 or 50 kids with their parents show up, and we set up at one end of the rink and just had like a small semicircle of people, and then the entire rest of the fucking roller rink. and it was so much fun doing that. And I didn't know this, but apparently that was like a really formative show for a whole bunch of people who went on to be in like kind of like crazy bands. So I work with a guy named Ryan, and Ryan, it turns out, lived in Clawson, went to that show. He became best friends with Pete, Dick, and Tony, and Dick and Tony were eventually in this band called Shitfucker, which is massive in Japan, like fucking huge. They became they became a massive punk band. And then Pete, oh God, I can't remember what band he's in, but he's in a metal band that is like fucking huge now. So, you know, like from that one show to kind of inspire, you know, kind of like a small cadre of folks that went on to make really fucking rad music. I literally only had these pieces put together for me like a couple of months ago. So I'm still like, I can't believe that shit. That's wild.
Yeah, it's always really funny, like how formative something can be for one person, but then for another person, it's just like it's just another night, man.
It's just Tuesday.
When you hear it from somebody else, like, oh my God, like, you know, that changed my perception on life, or like that made me go into this area or something like that. It's not I don't mean it to sound like an ego trip or anything, but if anybody ever tells you that, it's like, oh man, like I'm doing something right.
Yeah,
or I
exactly.
did something right that, you know, changed the course of something. Like I was part of something bigger.
Yeah, because like I said, for you, it could have been like, man, this is tough, and it's like it's just a Tuesday, and like I'm just doing what I do, kind of thing. But for them, they're like, no, man, what you're doing is amazing. Please keep doing it, and that's always, that's the kind of thing. It's always great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pete, by the way, is in this amazing metal band called Perversion. So
okay.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I definitely wanted to make sure that I got that out there.
Nice.
You know, as long as we're shouting people out.
So you are uniquely able to answer this question for me amongst my friends.
Sure.
You're one of the ones that absolutely loves punk, but punk has so many like subgenres of punk rock music.
You're not kidding.
What is crust punk?
Okay. All right. So crust punk is specifically a genre of punk that has a heavy crossover with metal. Stylistically, that's really all it is. It generally tends to be very fast, you know, very, you know, guitar heavy, guitar driven, sometimes solo driven, but like crust also sort of describes the aesthetic of punk, right? Mm-hmm. Specifically, crust punks are known to not shower very much.
So that was my context clue, and that's what I thought it was all about. And I didn't
That's where the crust comes from. Yes. Yes.
Right. All right. Excellent. So
it's sometimes also referred to as like D-beat. D-beat's sort of like a subgenre of crust punk. But it's you know, a lot of the, you know, the just screaming, just, you know, played very fast. You know, even though there's variations of that, those are the things that tend to stylistically define crust punk.
All right, so I was driving on the right road, but I didn't know I was going in the right direction. So like I had like one of the clues, but not all of the clues.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much you guys watch other Twitch streamers, like political Twitch streamers like Hasanabi, who always makes the joke that, you know, our anarchists don't shower. That's kind of the origin of it.
Sure.
Actually, the best reference I could make to it, the two punk characters on Portlandia that are like spare changing, those are crust punks. Stylistic, you know, like they'll have patches everywhere. Generally, the patch is not just so that you know what band they like. It actually does hold the garment together in some form or fashion. I hung out with a lot of crusty punks. In Detroit, I was in a crust punk band after AWOL sort of wrapped up. Isaac and I continued on to form Uprising, which was like, a crust. It was a crust punk band as much as you could be while still living with your parents in the suburbs.
You had sent me your Uprising stuff because you've got it up on Bandcamp.
Yeah, we were listening to it before we started.
Yeah,
yes.
And I definitely wanted to talk to you about that. Very cool stuff. No song longer than like 2.5 minutes, so very punk rock.
Yep.
But you sing in that band.
That's a very generous description of what I did in that band.
Well, I wanted to ask because when I hear a vocalist that sounds like that, my first thought is always, how are you going to do that every night? Or how are you going to do that 10 years from now? And did that ever occur to you while you were I'm going to sing this like throaty, death metal-y kind of like, this is how I'm going to do it?
So so when I was in AWOL, I think that was like the first time that I had done, punk vocals of any kind. And it was just like shouty, kind of stuff. And the weird thing about that, so the last show that AWOL ever played, we actually played with Chiodos in Flint, which they were still called the Chiodos Brothers at that time. And they were just we had no idea who they were. Like the fact that they became like kind of mega famous after that is hilarious because to me, they were just like a band with haircuts, right? Like, yep. That's really all they were. And I don't think I even stayed to watch their set because I was horrendously sick during that show. And so I'm doing backup vocals, but there was one song where we did that sort of, punk rock thing where we all switch instruments. And so I did one song as a vocalist. And I actually ruptured something in my throat. And so for like 2 weeks afterwards, I'm not just hacking up big balls of phlegm. They're big balls of bloody phlegm.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying. And so it was like, okay, I need to find a better way of doing this. And so if you actually, you can, if anyone cares, I don't know that anyone would, but uprisedetroit.bandcamp.com, you can hear what recordings of the band exist. And on the demo, you can hear a much different version of my vocal styles. It's much lower. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say grunted, but like it's definitely like a little bit more back in the throat. And that I think was damaging.
I think that's why I'm always like, when I hear that vocal style, when I hear, people screaming and stuff, and that's why I always think that is because when I was in a band growing up, like Nirvana was our prototype. So I did a lot of screaming myself and I know I broke something in here.
Right.
Too, if you go on the emo side of things, that is why From First to Last fell apart because Sonny Moore could not scream like he used to scream anymore. And now he's Skrillex. Right. Same dude. He has gone back, he did do a date with them like a year or two ago where he did get on stage and actually sing and he was able to do it, but he had to modify a little bit. Yeah. Which I'm noticing with a lot of my aging rockers, all of them are modifying how they sing things live now. And I'm like, oh, y'all 100%. Are getting older. Oh, but 100%. You have that, or the guy, the dude from Avenged Sevenfold also had that where he had like surgery and stuff on his throat. So like the fact that you now do radio stuff, it's like luckily your voice still works, right?
Yeah, luckily it held up. And there are days where it's like, man, all I did was like talk to a couple of people today and I'll sit down to record an episode of Let's Play and my voice will just be dead. It'll rasp in the wrong places and you can just tell it's really tired. And I'm like, is that from what I did in my time, in a punk band? Right. So like, there was really never a consideration, how do I do this every night? Like, we never toured. We tried really, really hard to, but like all of us were still pretty young.
Yeah.
So it's funny because, so in Uprising, there was me, there was Isaac, there was Tim and Danny. That was the original lineup. And Tim was like, I'm going to get us a van. And, or he had a van. And he was like, yeah, we can take that on the road. And we were going to do like Chicago and up to Minneapolis, because Minneapolis was a really big sort of like DIY crust punk town at that point. So we were like, we want to get up there. And my parents were going to go on a trip to England, and they asked me if I wanted to go. And I was like, nah. When they told me the dates, I'm like, no, I'm going to be on tour then. And so like 2 days, they take off, they go to fucking, London or whatever. And then like 2 days before we're supposed to leave, Tim was like, yeah, man, I can't do it. My parents aren't going to let me use the van.
Yeah.
And it was just like, it was heartbreaking, but at the same time, he was like 16 or 17. You know what I mean? Like, his parents would have had to have been insane to let us take. And there's no way, like, looking back on it now, there's no way that van would have gotten us out of the state. 100%.
Then you were like, I can't believe they're doing this. Now you're like, I can't believe they didn't stop us sooner.
Yeah. But what I wish someone had been sort of realistic with me and been like, go to fucking England, you idiot. Like, what do you, like, even if you do go on tour, what do you think? You're going to like be in a band for the rest of your fucking life? Like, dude, go to England.
And some UK shit over there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're going to be able to go buy excellent records. Just go and do that. And like, but like, I think the tour was my idea, and I had booked most of the shows, and so like I had done most of the work for it. And I was like, what do you call it? Gambler's fallacy,
Yeah.
I had too much invested. So anyway, what's funny about that though is that Tim, after Uprising, went on to be in a very successful hardcore band called Fireworks that toured and like was on Warped Tour, and it was just like, where was that energy for us, Tim? No, I'm kidding. Tim, by the way, Tim's fucking awesome. I'm being sort of general with the names because I'm not sure how many people want me to talk about. Mostly because he's now a fucking a doctor. Like, he's a cancer doctor. Oh. So like, you know what I mean? Like, he's gone on to, in fact, actually both Tim and Danny went on to be doctors. So like,
the doctor walks in and he's got the scrubs on, but then his arms just sleeved from the wrist up.
Oh yeah, and
tattoos. That's
Tim. Oh, for sure, he's got a big chest piece. Yeah, 100%, 100%. But yeah, so like, yeah, that was the Uprising was a lot of fun. We did our demo session. We did one session in an actual studio. We went to Woodshed Studios right up off of 9 Mile.
That's cool.
I'm sure you guys have driven by that wig store 100 times.
Yeah.
That's right on 9 Mile. Yeah, next door to it is a recording studio nobody knows about. Actually, like a lot of people know about, but like you wouldn't know looking at it because there's no signage for it whatsoever.
It seems to be the trick a lot of the places I've noticed, because there's a lot of different recording studios around within, like, you even have like Ferndale and stuff, but I grew up down the street from the recording studio where ICP used to record. And so I used to run into them at like 7-Eleven and stuff. And they really like Frappuccinos and
I believe it.
Stuff like that. So they were always at Starbucks too with the chains and everything. But like when you have that, like you go by it and you never notice it's there.
You're going to have a good time in a recording studio. You have to move the dumpster to the side to open the door.
Yes. Straight up. And I swear to God, that's what we had to do.
It might not sound amazing, but it's going to be awesome.
The energy.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, so that's Woodshed Studio. It's run by Tim Pack, who was in this band called Angry Red Planet that was on Alternative Tentacles.
Nice.
Jello Biafra's label. So like there's a small Dead Kennedys connection. We worked with some really cool people. And then the other session that we did that I'm actually working on mixing now, which, I know it's like 20 years later. But that was recorded in Isaac's basement with Ryan V from Rebel Spies and the Suicide Machines.
Sweet.
So very cool. Like we worked with a lot of really, really cool people in our sort of like short 3-4 years as a band.
Just a real quick aside, musician to musician, which did you enjoy better, recording music or playing live?
That's a really good question. I think recording it, because I'm kind of a nerd. Like I really get into like the studio environment. I've worked in a studio, like the radio station that I work at right now has I think the very last like functional band studio in Detroit. So like that kind of stuff has always been, like really, really fascinating and interesting to me.
What's funny is the local music podcast that I did before we did this show, I always ask bands that question. You're the first one to say studio.
Really?
Because for me, it's studio. Yeah. I loved being in the studio, and that's why I always ask it, because I'm always interested, and you're the first local musician I've talked to. It's like, I think I like being in the studio more than I like being on stage.
Well, and here's the thing is, like,
it makes sense. We both worked in radio, so we're both nerds like that.
That's definitely a distinct possibility. But like, there's also this thing where like Uprising never played really big shows. Like we never played in front of a crowd that was like massive. And like when we did play in front of crowds, like they didn't know or really care that much.
Sure.
And there was a point. I actually have the flyer for the show right here. What was this?
Oh, show that on camera.
Yeah, let's see.
Deviate Detroit.
Nice.
So this was a show at Alvin's that had a ton of bands on it, right? And it was like it was a really big deal to like have sort of like DIY punk show that big in Detroit. And we got asked to play it, and we agreed. And I'm still embarrassed about this. But at the same time, it's also only about half my fault. But the show got written about in like either Real Detroit or Metro Times, and that was in sort of like my punker than thou, like, like and again, kind of going back to the Green Day thing, I didn't really care about like what other bands did or like bands that called themselves punk or whatever. But like with my band, I was really serious, like genuinely really serious about the way that I wanted it presented, who we wanted to be associated with, and like what kind of ethics we wanted to be associated with. And so when we saw it was in Metro Times, like not only was it in Metro, it got a write-up, but it also got an ad, like somebody paid money to like have it in there. We contacted the organizer and said, hey, we're not going to do this anymore. And to borrow a term from wrestling, that got us nuclear heat in the Detroit scene. And people stopped booking us on shows. Like we were, before that show, we were mostly playing shows booked by other people. And so we were playing in front of crowds that were, fairly decent sized. After that happened, we got no invitations to play shows, and we basically had to start booking our own. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, no, fuck it, do it yourself, and we did. And, we got really like fucking amazing bands to come through and to play with us. We played with Contravene, who it was like our favorite punk band at the time from Arizona.
That's cool.
And we eventually did a split record with, like, one side was Contravene, the other side was Uprising. That was so cool. They were really, really genuinely awesome people. We played with Bread and Water. We played with, we had a show booked with Wolf Brigade before Jan got a vocal cord infection and had to cancel it. We played with Kakistocracy and Witch Hunt. And I'm sure that these names mean almost nothing to anyone, but anyone who does kind of like is aware of what that scene was in like 2004, there's some big names that are in there. And so I was really proud of the fact that, like, even though we were sort of outcast in the scene, so to speak, we were like still determined to make it work. So, but like, it also made it really hard to be a band at that point too. Like, people weren't really buying our shit. And like, so that's why we were really like excited about things like trying to get out of the city and do a tour and stuff like that. We were really excited about like having a split record with a band that wasn't another Detroit band, so we got like way farther out there and exposed to a whole bunch of people. And I still get people who remember that split record and stuff. And we put out our own 7-inch that I still have like 100 copies of if somebody wants this for some reason.
Nice.
And so like, yeah, we really sort of like, we're like, okay, we bootstrapped it up and was like, fuck it. We're going to do this stuff ourselves and try to make it work. And, it was fucking tough. And we only ended up playing, I don't know, like less than 20 shows in the, 3 or 4 years that we were around. And they were fun, but like, yeah, I think I got more out of the studio and record making process, especially because we ended up pressing our own, right? Like, I think that's a totally different thing from like, oh, hey, I showed up at the studio one day and I played the song, and then the next thing I knew, I had a CD of my stuff. Right. It's like a totally different process to be like, okay, we're going to book the studio time. We're going to be there for the mixing. We're going to choose the mastering plant to send it off to. We're going to get the test presses back. We got to approve the test presses. And now we've got several hundred records that we have to figure out what to do with.
Right.
I think that was a much more interesting challenge to me, and one that I could overcome, where I was much less interested in playing scene politics and having to, glad hand people that I didn't really like. And, the final message that I got was, from like the punk scene was, there was one night when Isaac and I went to a show and someone ended up throwing a cinder block through Isaac's windshield.
Dang.
Yeah, we had to drive it home like that. It was fucked up. And so, yeah, like it was pretty clear that there was a certain section of folks that did not want us even there at a show as observers. So, yeah, that definitely made things a little awkward. And then, once I started going to college, it was sort of like, I can come down some weekends for like band practice, or if we get a gig, I can show up for that. But when Isaac finally went to college, it was like, okay, this is pretty much a summer activity now.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
You've seen that with
Yes,
you.
we have. Yes, we have. I had one more question I wanted to throw by you before we wrap this up. When we talk about your vinyl records and your love of the format of the vinyl format, was that born specifically because of like 7 inches and singles and the fact that there were songs in this format that you couldn't get in another format?
100%. Yeah. I think, and like, that's sort of the other thing that you kind of got to remember about DIY punk, especially in like the early 2000s, is that there was not a whole lot of interest in putting that music out on CD. Like there was like, I think it was a goal to be less commercially accessible, right? So CDs were like a thing for like a band that had a large enough discography to put out a discography record. You know what I mean? So most of what I wanted to hear only existed on vinyl. And so it really, it was an incentive, for me to start building up a collection. But like 7-inches are still a huge, massive part of my collection.
Yeah.
And I think the real attraction to that was like $6, and I get to check out a band I've never heard before, and I get like between 2 and 7 songs, or like if they're really a thrash band or a power violence band, I can get 17 songs on a 7-inch. You never know.
Yeah, that's kind of the great thing about EPs is if you really like the band, then like you've got 4 to 8 whole songs for it. But if you really don't like the band, you only have to sit through about 2 or 3 more songs.
Yeah, and it's the splits were also really good for that too, where it's like I know I like this band, and I'll check this other band out, and that is I think how my taste in punk grew, and like I was exposed to other bands faster because I'm also a completionist. Like if I get really into a band, one of my first big punk obsessions was The Pissed. I had to have the LP, I had to have all the EPs, I had to have the split EPs. Right. Then I started listening to the other side, and I'm like, oh, what's this brutally familiar band? This is really good. And so like, yeah, like that's, just the act of like, hey, we don't want to spend, like $1,200 on pressing an EP. Let's both spend $600 and we both get an EP out of it. Fucking brilliant. Like, I don't know. I think it's accidentally brilliant, but like, fuck, I have found so many bands from just doing that alone. And yeah, I would say, especially early on in my collecting, I was always way more on the lookout for 7-inches that I wanted, way more than LPs.
Do you have anything else?
Not that I can think of.
No?
No.
Nate, thank you so much. We could talk about this stuff for hours, and I'm sure we're going to have you back to talk about more stuff. But before we let you go, plug your shit.
Absolutely. So if you are interested in Uprising's music, uprisdetroit.bandcamp.com. We do have those 4 final songs that we recorded, but never really released in an official capacity. Those are going to be coming out one at a time on Bandcamp as soon as I finalize the mix. But once all 4 of them are out, we're looking at getting it pressed onto some form of vinyl. I don't know if it's going to be like a low run lathe or what it's going to be, but I don't know. If somebody out there with a record label is listening and is interested, get a hold of me. At Nate Benderama on Twitter is actually where you can do that. And if you want to listen to something completely unrelated, if you like video game news delivered weekdays, Monday through Friday, I do a daily video game news podcast called Let's Play Daily Gaming News. That's what you got to search for. So make sure to check that out. And also, I'm doing a weekly segment on WDET's Culture Shift called The One Update, where I get to talk a little bit more in depth about some of these big news stories that I report on Let's Play. So you can check all that out over at WDET.org.
Thank you so much, Nate.
Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We'll be right back with more of the Really Big Fan Podcast. Welcome back. It's the Really Big Fan Podcast. Thanks again to Nate Bender for hanging out with us and talking about punk music. You can, as he said, follow him on all of his projects. He's on Twitter at Nate Benderama, but then he's also doing the Let's Play Daily Gaming News podcast. He's still streaming over at Limit Break Radio's Twitch stream, and he's always got a lot of irons in the fire.
Yeah.
He's a good dude. Well, as we wrap up this week's podcast, let's just get into it. Let's do the serotonin boost. I always want to say melatonin boost. I'm like, that's for
sleepy.
That's for being sleepy. This week, my serotonin boost comes to us from Space Dive. So they had a room at Space Dive where they had a projector up. And I really liked that room because at first they were just showing like old Japanese Panasonic commercials with George Lucas in them, and old Star Wars like Empire Strikes Back cartoons and commercials for stuff like that. But then they played a song that the bad lip reading people did, and it's been in my head. I've listened to it every single day. It's called The Future, and if you haven't heard it, I highly encourage you to go on YouTube and search out the video. It is amazing. It is way better than it has any right to be as a song, to the point that I actually went on the C3 website for Rock Band and found that somebody had tracked The Future. So you can guarantee the next time we sit down to play Rock Band, we're going to be playing that song.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so fun.
It's in the post that I put up today on our Instagram account. It's only like 7 seconds. You can check it out.
Yeah.
Or you can go to mine and look at the Space Dive video, and you can hear like a full minute of it too, if you want to really invest your time.
So fun. So funny.
And of course, mine is going to be Blink-182 because last night was awesome. I did not get the shirt there. I will say that this is from Target for $12, which, yes, I am finally of the age that my bands are being converted into Target graphic
shirts.
tees.
Yep.
But they did a great job. We kind of ended up going last minute, and what worked out was that we got tickets in a really what would be considered a horrible spot necessarily, but we could actually see everything Travis Barker was doing because we were sort of behind him.
Yeah,
which was really fun to see.
They had sections behind the stage, so like we're seeing the projector backwards for the giant screen and stuff, and like when the fireworks go off, they're in front of the thing, so like we see them down here go off, but then there's nothing. But we could see from where we were down to the stage, which was cool because the stage had the Blink-182 emblem on it, and then like that lit up at certain points, which was really neat. But yeah, it was cool to see the bands kind of from behind, and then you can kind of look out and see what they're seeing, the big crowds and stuff.
Yeah, I got some pictures. I posted one picture up. I did not professionally shoot the show, but I did get some pictures with my phone that actually turned out pretty solid. And at the end of the show, when they were doing Damn It, they always put an interjection of a different song in there, just like a slip of a bar. And we weren't really sure because we had seen Mbop on the set list. We'd seen Two Princes. There was, I believe, in a thing called Love.
Yep.
I think they did Ice Baby, and they used to do just TLC's No Scrubs.
Yep.
I know for Coachella they did I Wish I Was a Little Bit Taller, I Wish I Was a Baller.
That's cool.
Last night they did Taylor Swift.
We're never ever getting back together.
Yes, and that was amusing as hell because she's currently on tour right now, and she just played like a 2.5 hour set in the rain, so it was nice to see them give her a nod, even though Travis is married to our Kardashian.
Sure.
So there's drama there. If you know it, you do. I'm not going to give you a rundown if you need it. You can look it up.
Yeah, Blink is more of like for me, it's more of a like I know the hits kind of thing, and I thought the set was very good. Even the songs that I didn't know, I was like, this is fun, this is fine.
Yeah, you had a harder time with Turnstile.
I did, yeah. There's something about Turnstile, like they're doing things I should be like. It should totally be my shit, and there's just something about it that I'm like, nah, I'm not into this. And I don't get it.
Well, awesome. Anything else you want to add to the
No,
mixture
just
today?
plug our shit, I guess. Like we just had Nate do. Of course, you can follow us on all the social media at Really Big Fan Pod. That's where you can find us on Twitch. On Wednesday mornings, we do a replay on Wednesday evenings around 7:30 of this week's episode. Thursday, it goes up on YouTube, usually.
Usually. I messed up last week, and I didn't get to upload Erica's because I got too busy. So Nate's and Erica's will be going up at the same time.
Yeah. And then you can hear the audio version of the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, or Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, wherever you're getting it. It should be up there distributing wise. And as always, rate and review us. Let us know what you think. Follow us on all the social media. Follow us on Twitch. Give us a sub. And hang out or go and check out our Patreon. We don't have any cool like bonuses for Patreon yet. It's something we're still like in the planning processes of. But whenever you donate to us, it allows us to take the time to do the show and to make sure we have the equipment to do the show and have a good time.
Heck yeah.
All right. We'll be back next week with the Really Big Fan Podcast. We're actually doing the interview tonight, which is going to be really fun. And we'll talk to you then. Nate says he loves Turnstile. I'm sorry. Like I'm not saying they were bad. I just like there's something going on there that is not connecting.
I
me.
think it was arena rock, honestly. Like
They're
not arena rock people.
Yeah.
And so I kept going, I feel like that should have, like, for them specifically, I would like to see them at either the Fillmore or doing something like that, and there being, or at least if you did the Shelter, you'd get the right vibe for it, because then you get people that could stage dive and do different stuff. It just doesn't work out in arena rock.
their sound does not translate to the Little Caesars Arena very well at all.
Yeah, it sounded like muffled Beastie Boys and Rage Against the Machine with like a little bit of shoegazy stuff, but yeah,
for sure. Well, for everybody going to AEW tonight, have a blast. I'll be looking for you on television. And, for everybody else, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for stopping by. And make sure you follow the channel so you can see when we're playing video games. And more importantly, when we're coming back on Wednesdays to do this. So have a good night, everybody. Or a good morning, I guess I should say.
You're in night mode still.
I am in night mode. Here you go. Here's the credits.